spaces if I choose to do so. Or again, I can see all of them. Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, where we'll be taking a look at Lens, the Kubernetes IDE, where I will be sharing secure access to my Kubernetes cluster via Lens spaces. Before jumping into the presentation and the demo itself, I want to thank Cloud Native Islamabad for having me here today. I'm more than excited for this webinar, and what we will be doing is we will do a presentation about what Lens, the Kubernetes IDE is, and then we will transition into a demo where we will really take a look at how you can share secure access with your developers, your colleagues, and so forth to your Kubernetes cluster. So again, Saim, thank you for having me here today. Could not be more than excited to be doing this with you. It is the week of KubeCon, so for everybody that is able to attend or is not able to attend KubeCon, I welcome you. We will be doing a social giveaway where we will be sending out some free Lens hoodies for the entire community. Once again, Saim, thank you for having me here today. I'm looking forward to the webinar and the presentation and the demo. And now let's just jump straight into it. So what I'll do from here is I'll start off by sharing my screen. I'm going to navigate to my presentation. I believe you guys can see my presentation now. I'll give everybody just 1 second. Excellent. So as mentioned, today we're talking about Lens, the Kubernetes IDE. Before taking a look at the features and all of the beautiful things within Lens itself, we're going to talk about why Lens was developed. So Lens was developed back in March of 2020. It was open source as a desktop application for all of your Kubernetes needs. The reason we did this is because Kubernetes is complex. It's extremely, extremely challenging to get up and running, and many organizations don't necessarily see the return on investment that they would like to see for their container initiatives. This is why we created Lens. Lens, as mentioned, is a user-friendly desktop application, 100% open source and free, built to work with any certified Kubernetes distro. Regardless if you're using Rancher K3s, Mirantis Kubernetes Engine, Red Hat OpenShift, EKS, and so forth, Lens simply works with any certified Kubernetes distro. The goal behind Lens and our team is really to improve the efficiency and the overall time to market that a user may need for the Kubernetes initiatives. We really, really want to eliminate the complexity when working with Kubernetes. This is why we built this technology, and this is why we see over 300,000 users leveraging this technology from a day-to-day basis. So there's two personas who would want to leverage Lens. We have our developers and our operators. Developers have quite an extensive workflow when it comes to building applications on top of Kubernetes. They write the proprietary code within maybe Virtual Studio, some type of IDE, then they're going to leverage a terminal and other tools like Git or Docker, and then they're going to have to leverage some type of CI/CD pipeline to really push that application to their Kubernetes service. So when are they using Lens? Well, they'll be using Lens at the end of their workflow. Once the application is pushed to their Kubernetes service, they're going to want to review the deployment. They're going to want to take a look at the observability, how it's performing. They're going to want to test on top of the application, maybe within a proof of concept Kubernetes cluster or a staging cluster. And then they're going to want to troubleshoot. They're going to want to see what is working with their application once it's pushed to their Kubernetes cluster and what is not. So that's the workflow of a developer. It's quite different than an operator. An operator is going to leverage Lens much differently. An operator is going to come to their day. They have many different clusters that they need to review. They're going to check the health and the status of the cluster through the pre-built-in Prometheus via Lens. They're going to want to take a look at the real-time events that Lens pushes to the user. They're going to want to take a look at the lifecycle management. So if they see there's a drop in the file system, that's concerning. And then they're going to want to troubleshoot and debug and see why there was a drop in the file system itself. So Lens allows both developers and operators to become much more efficient and productive when leveraging Kubernetes. Here are some stats of Lens. I always say this, and I apologize to some, but we are the self-proclaimed world's most popular Kubernetes IDE. And we have some stats to back that up as well. Here you can see we have over 15,000 GitHub stargazers, very close to 16,000. We would greatly appreciate if you enjoy using Lens to go to our GitHub repo and please give us a stargazer. That shows our developers and our community that you enjoy the product and the features within the free open source technology. And it makes us feel just a little bit better about what we're building and the work and the responsibility that we have to leverage every single day. Here we can also see that we have over 300,000 users, which is constantly growing day over day. And in the last 30 days, as of October 10th, just a couple of days ago, we've seen over 160,000 clusters. Great. So we talked about why we built Lens, who would leverage Lens. We took a look at the stats and the features, but really let's talk about what Lens does for everybody. Well, Lens is a free desktop application, as mentioned, 100% open source that works with any certified Kubernetes distro. It really provides the full situational awareness of all of your clusters, regardless if they're on-prem or in the public cloud for that user. It's designed for both developers and operators who need to work with Kubernetes from a day-to-day basis. If you're new to Kubernetes, Lens is also a powerful tool for you as well. It's really going to lower the barrier of entry for anybody that's getting started with Kubernetes. And hopefully it improves, again, the productivity and the quality of life for more experienced users. That was a quick overview of Lens itself. Now let's take a look at some of Lens's top features. We're going to take a look at these features at a very high level, but when we get into the demo itself, we will review each and every single one of the features within Lens. The first feature, which was brought to Lens with Lens 5, which was released back in June of this year, is the unified catalog. The unified catalog should be thought of as a cloud-native directory where you can access different clusters, spaces, web links, workloads, and other cloud-native tools that you would like to leverage. Within the catalog, users can filter and organize and label all of these different resources that you would like to leverage, allowing the user to improve their productivity when switching from cluster to cluster, and also having all of the tools that they need in their arsenal to become extremely efficient when working with Kubernetes. The next one is Lens Hotbar. The Hotbar should be thought of as the main navigation within Lens that really allows you to switch from cluster to cluster, tool, resource, or web link very easily. The Hotbar allows our users to build their own automated workflows within Lens, the desktop application. So I can have one hotbar specific to staging clusters. I can have another hotbar specific to one of my customers, or I can have a hotbar specific to production grade clusters. So users have a ton of flexibility when it comes to creating their own workflows within Lens, the desktop application. The next feature, which is one of my favorite features, and many of our users leverage this, is the pre-built-in Prometheus. Lens leverages a pre-built-in Prometheus that allows our users to very easily see how their cluster is performing in the last hour. You can see the CPU from the memory, the network, and the disk, and get a granular view into all of your Kubernetes objects, whether it's a pod, a deployment, and so forth. This is really going to help our users better understand how their cluster is performing in real time, without the need of writing or pushing any Prometheus to their Kubernetes cluster. Lens does this out of the box. The next feature, one of the most important features, is the Smart Terminal. The Smart Terminal comes with kubectl and automatically upgrades it to match your Kubernetes cluster's API version. Meaning, when I switch from cluster to cluster, the terminal will automatically update to ensure that I'm working with the correct Kubernetes cluster API endpoint. This is really going to allow us to work with multiple Kubernetes clusters very, very easily and efficiently, which we'll be taking a look at today as well. Helm charts, another cool feature within Lens. Within Lens, there are thousands of different repos that users can leverage to deploy a Helm chart directly to their Kubernetes cluster. Users can deploy a Helm chart directly in their cluster without the need of writing any command line. So this is really going to help users that are just getting started with Kubernetes that want to understand a Helm chart, a package, deploy an application directly to their Kubernetes cluster. When I first got started with Kubernetes, this was an extremely useful tool for me to very well understand how an application works on top of a Kubernetes cluster and how it's deployed and so forth. So again, users can search from thousands of different repos and deploy a Helm chart directly to their cluster extremely easily. We may or may not take a look at this today. Lastly, or not lastly, but one of the coolest extensions, almost lastly, my apologies, is the extensions. There are extensions that are built on top of Lens by the cloud native community that our users and organizations can leverage. I look at this in two ways, and it's very interesting. The first way is allowing startups within the cloud native space to create beautiful extensions on top of Lens for them to be able to begin harnessing our users. For example, an organization can create an extension on top of Lens that shows us security vulnerabilities within my Kubernetes cluster. We will be taking a look at a couple of extensions as well. And the flip side of it is it allows our users to leverage new technologies that they may not necessarily know about when they're working within Kubernetes. So me being a user, I can add an extension that tells me security vulnerabilities for my cluster very, very easily for free. I do want to mention that there are over 100 different extensions currently built. Majority of those are private extensions that users leverage and organizations leverage on top of Lens. Towards the end of the demo, we will be taking a look at several different extensions that are publicly made available and vetted by Team Lens that anyone can use. Lastly, and this is what we're here for, everyone, Spaces. Lens Spaces is a centralized cloud-based offering that allows our users to securely share access to a Kubernetes cluster, regardless if it's on-prem or in the public cloud. Users can very easily add their colleagues to a space, share a cluster to that space, and give them secure access to that cluster. The beauty of this is you're never releasing your kubeconfig file to a colleague or friend, meaning you can add or revoke access to your Kubernetes cluster very easily. This checks all of the boxes when it comes to the best security practices within the industry itself. Well, excellent. From here, we are going to jump into the demo. But before I do this, I'm going to share a screen where users can find me, find Team Lens, join our Slack community, and ping me if you guys want a hoodie like this. Join our Slack community, please. Tell us where you came from. Luckily, we have Saim, who's an amazing individual who's helped us quite a lot here at Team Lens. And we've also sent him a hoodie too. And if you guys are interested in the hoodie, join our Slack community and feel free to ping me. Well, excellent. Without further ado, I say we jump into the demo itself. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate back to Lens, close this, and go to our home. Here I have Lens launched already. Typically what would happen, actually, why don't we just launch it again? We'll close it. We'll go back and I will launch Lens one more time, just so users can see how it starts up. Lens 5 is starting. And excuse me for all of my weird things on my desktop. Right there, you can see there's a kubeconfig file in my terminal. Excellent. So here is Lens. Currently, we're on version Lens 5.2, which is a great release that came with many feature updates and improvements and bugs, or fixes for bugs. From here, when we navigate into Lens, we're going to want to go to our catalog. Within our catalog is where everything lives in Lens, from our clusters to our web links and our spaces. Going to our clusters, it's quite easy to add a cluster directly to Lens. You would click this plus icon, and there's 3 ways to do so. You can search for a kubeconfig file. You can copy and paste the kubeconfig file, or Lens will search your operating system for a kubeconfig file and automatically update it. From here, I'm going to open a cluster. This is going to be my K0s cluster. That is also a Kubernetes distro built by Team Lens. And voila, I connected to my K0s cluster, and immediately we're brought to this home screen where I can see how my cluster is performing in the last hour. From the CPU to the memory, the pods, and I get live updates and real-time events of what's currently happening within my desktop application or within my cluster. Clicking here, I'm immediately brought to this pod where we get this warning message, and I can immediately see everything that is happening within this Kubernetes resource. And here's the event. Red is not a good thing. So we follow the color code green, yellow, red, green being good, yellow being pending, and red being a warning message, as you guys can see from here. From here, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to connect another cluster to Lens. So I'm going to click the home button. We're brought to my clusters. We're going to click here. We're going to open this. So now I'm launching a GKE cluster on top of Lens. And this is something that we just talked about, where any certified Kubernetes distro works on top of Lens. So on the left-hand side, this orange icon is my K0s cluster. It's a Kubernetes distro built by Team Lens. And this pink icon is a GKE cluster. Here you can see there are no metrics currently available, and that's totally fine. I do not want to add metrics to this Kubernetes cluster, but if you chose to do so, you would right-click the hotbar icon, click Settings, scroll down to Lens Metrics, and enable your Prometheus stack. Doing so is going to launch your Prometheus directly onto your Kubernetes cluster, and you'll be able to get that beautiful visualization of how your cluster is performing in the last hour. I'm going to go back to my catalog once again, which is that home button we talked about. I'm going to click here. I'm going to launch my Minikube cluster as well. So users can see I have this local cluster as well. So we have a public cluster on Lens, and we have 2 local clusters. We have a K0s cluster, and we have a Minikube cluster as well. Opening this cluster, we can immediately see there's some warning messages. And of course, we do not have the Prometheus set up here. For today's demonstration, we're going to work with the K0s cluster since it's more tuned for demo purposes. Navigating back to my K0s cluster, let's talk about the smart terminal. Clicking this plus icon is going to allow us to do several things. We can either start a terminal session, or we can create a resource. We'll touch on creating a resource in just a bit. For now, let's start with the terminal session, which I'll click this, and immediately it begins connecting to our cluster API. So from here, what I would do is I would do kubectl version, and it immediately tells us our version. And again, the smart terminal is always upgrading to the correct kubectl version to match to the correct Kubernetes cluster API endpoint. I think that's extremely important to note. So here we can see our Git version. Now, if I navigate back to my GKE cluster, launch the terminal, it begins connecting. We run the command again, and we can see that it's a different version. So the beauty behind this is being able to navigate from cluster to cluster very easily without having to write any command line, as we just saw. Switching back to my GKE cluster, I can immediately go to workloads, view my pods. We want to do all namespaces, and immediately see how all of my pods, right? So this allows us to always work within the correct Kubernetes cluster API endpoint. This is going to reduce error and really improve efficiency when working with Kubernetes and multiple Kubernetes clusters. So there's several things we've already talked about. We've taken a look at our catalog where we have our clusters, web links, and spaces. We've taken a look at the hotbar, the left-hand side, which is our main navigation that allows us to very quickly navigate from cluster to cluster or web link or space. We've taken a look at multi-cluster management through the smart terminal being able to switch from cluster to cluster very, very easily and quickly. And we've taken a look at the pre-built-in Prometheus to be able to very easily understand how our cluster is performing. There are several other things we'll talk about before sharing the key feature of today's demo, which is Lens Spaces. But I do want to give everybody an overview of Lens, since I'm not necessarily sure if there's new users to Lens, never used Lens, and so forth. So we will be sharing our cluster with Saim today in just a bit. But first, we're going through all of the Lens features so everybody can very easily understand how Lens performs and the capability it allows our users to perform. Excellent. From here, we're going to navigate to nodes, and we can immediately see additional details of our nodes. We have two nodes here. We have a K0s and we have a worker node. We can see that it's ready. We can see when it was launched. It was launched 11 hours ago, the version that it's associated with. And then of course I can click into here and immediately be given that granular view of how this particular node is performing in the last hour. So in our overview screen, we can see how our cluster is performing, but in the nodes, we can see exactly how our nodes are performing in the last hour from, again, the CPU to the memory, the disk, and the pods. Dependent on your role-based access control, users have various different administrative functions that they can perform to their cluster. On the right-hand side, users can shell into a node, they can cordon a node, they can drain the node, they can edit this resource, right? So if I hit edit, I immediately can make configuration changes all in real time. We won't do this. Going back here, and of course, I can delete the node if I choose to do so. Lens always leverages your role-based access control from your kubeconfig file. So rest assured, if somebody has access to your kubeconfig file, but their RBAC permissions aren't necessarily the best or are not administrative functions, they cannot just add a cluster to Lens and begin performing administrative functions to that cluster. You need the correct role-based access control to perform some of these more complex administrative functions. From here, I'm going to navigate to pods, and we can immediately see all of the pods that are running within our Kubernetes cluster, the containers they're associated with, the namespace they're associated with, what it's controlled by, the node it sits on, the status of the pod, and so forth. Another beautiful thing about Lens is the ability to filter. I can filter and immediately see only default namespaces if I choose to do so. Or again, I can see all of them. One caveat I do want to mention here, everyone, is when I first started using Lens, I did not realize I had a filter, and I thought I was going crazy because I couldn't find specific pods that I was interested in. So that being said, the filtering follows you throughout the entire desktop application. So again, if I filter for default and I navigate to, let's say, deployments, it's only going to show the default namespace deployments. From here, I can click into this and immediately be given a much more granular view and all of the details associated to this deployment. We can scroll, we can see when it was created, the name, the namespace, the labels, the annotations, and so forth. Exiting out of this, we can immediately see our daemon sets as well. That's unfiltered, see how it follows us. So we're going to hit all namespaces. You can see our daemon sets, stateful sets, replica sets, jobs, cron jobs, and so forth. If I switch to my GKE cluster, immediately we get the same thing. And I can click into this, immediately get that granular view of all of the details of this particular pod. So what's the beauty here? Well, the beauty is that I've just switched to a completely new cluster in the matter of seconds, and I've immediately been able to understand everything associated to this pod. If I want to perform some administrative functions, I can, again, on the top right-hand side, and I can view my pod logs. I can open them, and I can also download these logs and send them to a colleague to help me troubleshoot if I choose to do so. From here, we're going to exit this. Now, one thing we didn't necessarily talk about is why that filtering capability within Lens is so valuable. Traditionally, if a user wanted to see how all of their resources are being displayed, they would have to write some type of command line. So here we would say clear kubectl get all A. And this function or this command line is immediately going to show us all of our resources within our Kubernetes cluster. But we still need to filter here, or we still need to launch into one of these pods. We still want to be able to connect to one of these pods. So it's very time consuming when you're working with multiple clusters, large clusters, trying to find the correct resource you want to work with, begin working with that resource, making configuration changes and so forth. Lens really takes all of that away and allows our users to be much more efficient. Excellent. So we've talked about several different things. Now I want to take a look at this new section within Lens, which is creating a resource. Lens has released this section here, which is creating a resource that allows our users to very easily deploy a new resource based off of a template provided by Team Lens. So if I click deployment, I'm immediately given the code that I need to deploy an Nginx deployment to my Kubernetes cluster. If I click create and close, we've created this new Nginx deployment. I can navigate to deployments and I can see that this was created. From here, what is so valuable about Lens as well is we get to leverage Kubernetes and we can scale this deployment up or down if we choose to do so. So currently we have 3. If I want to change this to, let's say 6, hopefully this doesn't kill my cluster. You can click scale. Scrolling down, we begin creating the containers necessary for this particular scale up or scale down deployment. Also, we get to leverage Kubernetes again through the user interface to scale this back down to 3. Now we're terminating it. And again, we only have 3 now. So we've taken a look at many different things: Prometheus, multi-cluster management, unified catalog, Hotbar, deploying a resource within our Kubernetes cluster, scaling that resource by leveraging Lens. We took a look at the filtering capability within Lens. Now let's take a look at our Helm charts. To access the Helm charts, what you would have to do is you would scroll down to apps, you would click charts, and it immediately begins pulling up all of the repos that I've pre-configured within my settings of Lens desktop application. Typically this takes not so long to load. The only reason this is happening is currently my CPU on this computer is running out quite a bit. And that's also why I'm not going to deploy a Helm chart today to my Kubernetes cluster because of demonstration purposes. And I don't want something to kill my desktop application or interfere with our Zoom recording and so forth. I have many programs currently running, and this is something that could stall our webinar today. And that's the last thing I would want to do. But long story short, users can find the Helm chart they're interested in, click it, and you're immediately brought all of the details necessary for this specific Helm chart. You're going to be able to see every single thing that would be deployed to our Kubernetes cluster prior to deploying this to our cluster. I'm going to actually exit out here because I can see it's beginning to respond relatively slowly. Again, this is not Lens, it's actually my current operating system where I have various different programs currently running. From here, we're going to transition to Lens extensions, which is the last feature we'll take a look at before taking a look at Lens spaces, which is the whole reason why we're here today. From here, what we would do is we would navigate to Lens, we would click extensions, and we're brought to this screen. Within this screen, you're going to be able to do several different things. You can check out the docs on how to build an extension if you choose to do so. And you can click the available extensions, which is going to bring you to our GitHub repo, where we've vetted the code to each and every single one of these extensions. And we've publicly said, yes, you guys can use these. They're safe to use. Feel free to use them. Here are several different extensions that you can see. We have Mirantis Container Cloud, built by Team Mirantis, that allows you to add your MCC instance to Lens without the need of a kubeconfig file. You have your Starboard extension, which is a beautiful extension that allows you to see vulnerabilities within your Kubernetes cluster. And you have various different other extensions here as well. I suggest to each and every single one of you to come here, click into one of these vendor extensions or the community extensions or the fun experimental extensions and give them a try. From here, I'm going to navigate back to Lens. And we can see I already have 2 extensions enabled. To be able to enable an extension, you would download it via that repo. You would search for it on your operating system, and then you would click install. Since I already have 2 extensions installed on my desktop application, we're not going to do that. Instead, we're going to take a look at these. So the first extension that we have is, we can see it's a GKE sync. The GKE sync appears on the bottom right-hand side of my screen where it says GKE. And long story short, this will launch me to my console within Google Cloud. And it adds my Kubernetes cluster directly to Lens without the need of a kubeconfig file. So just clicking that button where it said GKE, it immediately syncs my cluster, this autopilot cluster that we have within our catalog. For the clusters, we can see the autopilot cluster here. And we can see it here. So, and then you can see the source is GKE sync, right? So that's coming from that extension. It's an extension built by Team Lens. One of our core cloud architects built this extension, and I use it all the time. It's extremely easy to use, and it's one of our best extensions. The next extension I want to talk about, if we navigate back to our cluster, we can go to K0s. Sorry, I'm just moving this screen here. Scrolling down, we can immediately see our last extension that we're going to talk about, which is the resource map. It's the Kubernetes resource map. Uh-oh, looks like our application crashed. Maybe we won't be able to take a look at this extension. That's all right, though. Let me go here. Let's just see if we can see it here. Oh, it doesn't want to let us. That's totally fine. That's totally fine. I can click into one of these pods, scroll down, and I believe we'll be able to see this extension. Perfect. So unfortunately, we can't see it in this extension here. I believe this extension needs to be updated due to the new Lens 5.2 that we have. But here we can see the resources that are associated to this pod. So this resource map is an extension built on top of Lens that allows us to very easily understand how all of our Kubernetes resources and objects work together. So within this pod, we can see there's a daemon set. There's the pod, the GKE. We can see all the labels associated to it. We can see the nodes and so forth. We can see the status. So this is a really useful extension for new users getting up and running with Kubernetes to understand how everything works together. Excellent. So I know we've taken a look at many different things here today, various different things, and it's been quite fun. But now let's take a look at why we are all here today, which is Lens Spaces. Again, Lens Spaces is a centralized cloud-based offering built on top of Lens that allows our users to securely share access to a Kubernetes cluster securely with their colleagues or developers and so forth. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate back to my home. I'm going to go to Spaces, and I'm going to create a new space. The new space I'm going to create is, let's call this Cloud Native. And we've just created this space. From here, I'm going to navigate to the space settings. Go to members. We don't have any members. I'm going to go to invitees, and I'm going to invite my colleague Saim to this space. Once I invite him to this space, I will add my Kubernetes cluster to the space itself. Then I'm going to give the ball to Saim, allow him to share his screen, and he will be able to show you that he now has secure access to my Kubernetes cluster without me having to share the kubeconfig file. The reason why this is so valuable is, one, it checks all the security checkboxes for best practices. But two, he doesn't get access to the kubeconfig file, meaning I can add and revoke access immediately without the need of asking for the kubeconfig file back. I could do it immediately and so forth. So from here, I'm going to invite him to my space. Oops, 1 second. Enter. And the invite has been sent to him. Before having him share his screen, we can see that it expires in 7 days. From here, I'm going to navigate to Teams, where we can see there's an admin team, an owner team, and I can create a new team on top of this space as well. The reason you would want to create a new team is giving specific access to a Kubernetes cluster. What I mean by that is I can create a team called developers, create a new role binding within my Kubernetes cluster where I only give them access to specific namespaces of my Kubernetes cluster. This is going to ensure that whoever I give access to or whatever team I give access to, they will be working in the correct context that they need for that Kubernetes cluster. Again, I can ensure that they can only leverage a specific namespace, all namespaces, and so forth. I'm not going to create a new team today because I would have to write some code, and for demonstration purposes, it's not the best. Instead, what we're going to do is we're going to share my cluster to this space, then give the ball to Saim, and he's going to share his screen with all of us so we can see exactly what he sees now that he has access to the space. Clicking escape, navigating back to my clusters, clicking my clusters. This is the share icon. Clicking this, I'm going to share it to Cloud Native. And here we're going to want to install Cluster Connect. Cluster Connect is the backend feature that really allows lens spaces to work. It's an end-to-end encryption that creates a tunneling between the Kubernetes cluster and the Kubernetes API endpoint that allows us to share the cluster securely or share access to the cluster securely. We never share the cluster. We never share the kubeconfig file. We just share access to that cluster. So we're going to install it and click share. Usually takes a moment. Lens Spaces Cluster Connect is installed. Your cluster has now been shared. Excellent. So from here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to navigate back to Zoom. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I'm going to promote Saim to a panelist. Just 1 second. Promote the panelist. Hey, Saim. Hello, Saim. Saim, can you hear me?
Yes, I do. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for being the individual that I get to share the cluster with. Really, really appreciate it. Hey, nice hoodie.
Thanks. Wonderful.
Absolutely.
And now I can share my screen to share my cluster with you.
Yes, please.
Yes, okay. So let me do this. Share my screen. So can you enable me to share my screen? So it's asking me to disable it right now.
Yeah, you should be able to share. Give me 1 second. I'm going to make you the host, and that should make you be able to share the screen. So, Saim, I'm changing you to the host. That should give you access to share your screen. If you please do so, let's see what happens. Okay, so you're now the host. See if you can share your screen now.
Yes, absolutely.
Perfect. Nice. From here, Saim, what you will need to do is you will need to go to your profile on the top right-hand side where it says SA. Go to Profile Settings. Profile Settings. Yep. And then navigate to Spaces and accept that invitation. Excellent. From here, you will navigate back to your catalog. Yep, and then click clusters. And now you can see that default cluster. Click to open it. Click that big green button on your left. Yep. The DE. Yep. And now we'll see that it immediately launches my local K0's cluster directly to Saim's desktop application. And boom. Now Saim has full access, or read-only access, excuse me, to my Kubernetes cluster that I shared with him via Lens Spaces. Now this is totally game-changing if you ask me. We did not have to share a kubeconfig file at all. He did not need to log into a VPN. We did not need to air gap anything. Instead, we're giving him secure access to the Kubernetes cluster that I can revoke at any moment. So Saim, thank you for sharing. I'm going to take the ball back now if you do not mind, but this was absolutely awesome. Thank you for doing this for me. Thank you for allowing me to share my Kubernetes cluster with you. And to everyone watching, this is the beauty of Lens Spaces. You're able to share access to a Kubernetes cluster securely without the need of having to give a kubeconfig file to anyone. This allows you to be extremely secure when working with multiple Kubernetes clusters. And if you want additional individuals to access your cluster or access a specific namespace in your cluster, you can create a team, give that team the proper role binding, and then they can view a specific section within your Kubernetes cluster. So from here, what I'm going to do one last time is I'm going to share my screen. Saim, if you, yep, thank you. I'm going to share my screen. And I'm just going to throw up our contact information slide where users can reach out to me, reach out to Team Lens, follow us on Twitter, give us a GitHub Stargazer if you do not mind. And I want to thank each and every single one of you for joining myself here today. I want to thank Cloud Native Islamabad and Saim for having me here today. I thought it was a wonderful discussion where we took a look at all of Lens's features, but as well as sharing secure access to a Kubernetes cluster via Lens Spaces, which is our newest feature. I do want to mention to our community and to everybody watching here today that we have a new release coming, which is Lens 5.3 in the next couple of weeks, and this is going to change Kubernetes for everyone. Thank you, everyone. Have a fantastic day. Bye-bye.